Hello, it's John Heaton, and good day to you all, and hope you're having a lovely summer like we are here in Budapest. And looking forward to some big matches in the Wimbledon tennis this afternoon, which always reminds me of home because I come from Wimbledon. So that's all good stuff. But today I'm going to review Milk and Honey. I had a couple of requests to do this, John and Yoko's album. For some reason I didn't get around to reviewing it. I know in the early days after John died, after Milk and Honey came out, I must admit I did compile the John tracks from Milk and Honey with the John tracks from Double Fantasy to make a pretty sensational 1980 Lennon album. But in later years I began to appreciate Double Fantasy for what it was, a joint statement, and Milk and Honey I'm going to try and do the same, although it's a little difficult because some of the Yoko tracks were not actually written at the time of before John died, so they were written later, so it doesn't really work as a double act, although partly it does. So before I start, I'm just going to give a nod to a couple of books I picked up recently. One of them is In Your Mind, pretty decent biography of Yoko Ono from Madeline Baccaro, and she was kind enough to sign it to me here. A friend of mine, Andrew Brooks, was in New Jersey for the Beatle Fest, and I got him to ask her to sign the book for me, and also Sam Haverdoy in the Gold Writing has signed it for me, who I met in Budapest a couple of months ago doing a talk on his art. So it's a very good book. It goes through all of Yoko's career, gives a chapter each on all of her albums, and covers all her avant-garde art as well, well researched, and a good read. And the other book I picked up was Confessions of a Rock and Roll Groupie, or Rock and Roll Name Dropper, for Laurie Kay, and this is also signed by Laurie because she was also at the New Jersey Beatle Fest. So she was lucky enough to do the final, or unlucky enough, depending on where you look at it, because she said it was the best and the worst day of her life. She did the final interview with John Lennon on the afternoon that he died, with Dave Sholin from RKO, San Francisco radio team, and that is covered in a lot of detail, as you would expect in this book. And also she was lucky enough to interview Paul and Linda and the members of Wings during the Back to the Egg time. And that's pretty well covered in here as well, and it's pretty hilarious that they were passing joints around to each other. Found that quite amusing. And obviously the interview which she did with Lennon is available on YouTube. You can listen to the whole thing, and it's pretty heartbreaking, but I do go back to it quite often. The rest of the book's reasonably interesting, so worth picking up if you want to have the details on Lennon's last interview. I think it's pretty important. So what else should we talk about? Well, we'll just get on to the subject matter now, shall we? So Milk and Honey, first of all, as it first appeared, I'm going to review it, and then at the end I'm going to I've come up with an alternative track listing to Milk and Honey to make it more of what I think it would have been, but that's for later. So it came out on Polydor. After Double Fantasy, there was an argument between Jack Douglas and Yoko, and they fell out, so he doesn't even get a credit on here. And I think he did file a lawsuit and got some kind of compensation for it later, but at the time he wasn't credited. Came out on Polydor, which is a little unusual to see that. Obviously Ringo had been on the Polydor label, but it was a bit unusual to see John and Yoko. But anyway, it was a decent hit album, number 3 in the UK, came out in January 84, number 11 in the US, not sure about in other countries. So decent enough chart success. But as I say, not all of the tracks from the album were recorded or written in 1980, and the reason for that is she put a lot of those tracks which were left over, which would have been on Milk and Honey perhaps, she put them on her album Season of Glass in 1981. So for that reason, a lot of the songs which might have featured on Milk and Honey were not available because she'd already used them. So that's fair enough, but that's just the way it is. And Season of Glass is easily my favourite Yoko album, by the way. So the album opens with I'm Stepping Out, and obviously with Lennon's tracks, one is a little frustrated that they're not finished. They're decent studio run-throughs with the full band, Earl Slick, Tony Levin, Hugh McCracken, George Small, Arthur Jenkins and John. So it's a decent enough, it's not like a home demo or a sort of shitty cassette recording or something like that. It's a decent studio run-through, but you can tell he's still working out what to do in the middle eight or the bridge. You know, it just says boogie, and they just play a few instrumental bars, and I think he would have obviously fleshed that out with some kind of arrangement. I'm not quite sure what. I haven't actually heard anyone cover this song and come up with what they think. Would let me know in the comments if you know if someone has done a full sort of fleshed out version of I'm Stepping Out, but I'm not aware of any. But anyway, it's a decent enough opener, but it's interesting that this track was left off from Double Fantasy, because I think it was one of the first tracks laid down in those sessions. And he'd obviously had enough of house husbandry, and his son was 5, and he wanted to sort of come out into the limelight, and we all know what happened tragically. But at the time, he was very upbeat, and the lyrics reflect that. You know, I put on my spacesuit, I've got to look my best, I'm going out to do the city. And he says to Yoko at the end, I'll be in by 1 or 2 or 3. That's pretty amusing. Anyway, Sleepless Night is the next track from Yoko. Not much to say about this track. I think I can guess what it's about. I'm not going to go into it, but it's pretty unmemorable. Not particularly good track. I don't want to face it as a superb track. And for those people complaining that Lennon was too romantic and sentimental on Double Fantasy, it was pretty refreshing to hear some of the songs on Milk and Honey, because they were more rocky and more upbeat perhaps, and I Don't Want to Face It is brilliant. And even though it's just a studio run through, it's got a lot of energy. Lennon's vocal is peerless, and there's a great alternative version on the Lennon Anthology box, which came out in 1998, which has a few alternate versions from tracks from Milk and Honey. Nobody Told Me as well is on there. So that's a great track. People reading into the lyrics about every time I look in the mirror, I don't see anybody there. You know, maybe that was some kind of premonition of him dying, but I don't really think it was that. Just playing playful lyrics. Don't Be Scared from Yoko, again, not from 1980, I don't think. From copyrighted here is 1982. It's a reggae track. It's harmless enough. It's inoffensive. It's okay. Nobody Told Me. Now, the rumor has it that John was going to give this track to Ringo, but if I was John, I would have kept it, because I think it's one of his top solo songs. And when I did my ranking, I think I put it pretty damn near the top, because I absolutely love it. It's humorous. It's got energy. It's a good melody. It's well played, and I just think it's top drawer Lennon. And I remember this guy at Exeter University. We were in the Red Cow pub, where you could get Hill's cider for 47p a pint, which was pretty lethal, by the way. Anyway, there's this African guy called Cyprian, and he used to love that track, and he used to sing it, and he used to not know the words. He just goes, nobody does it. Anyway, it was pretty amusing. We all sang along with him in the Red Cow in 1984, I guess. So that's great. Oh Sanity is a sort of 1 minute track to end side one, not much to say about that. So we'll turn over to side 2, Yo Sanities from Yoko. Borrowed Time is John trying to do a reggae track, and he's expressed sort of dissatisfaction with getting New York musicians to do reggae in 1973 on the Mind Games album for the title track, Middle Eight. And here again, the musicians are trying, and it's a decent band. Obviously, Tony Levin and co are top-notch musicians, but they maybe it's just because it's just a demo or a studio run-through. They haven't quite got the groove, but it's still very pleasant to listen to, and I think he would have fleshed it out with some kind of arrangement had John lived. I'm sure he would have done. It's not my favourite track, if we're honest, but it's it's good. And obviously very sad lyrics about living on borrowed time without a thought for tomorrow. Well, how true that turned out to be, unfortunately. Your Hands is a touching song about John from Yoko, but not written until after he died. But Lennon's hands were one of the things that she always loved about him. So that's nice to see. Forgive Me, My Little Flower Princess. Well, this is the weak link from Lennon on the album. And I think had he lived and they'd done Milk and Honey, I doubt if this song would have made the cut. I don't think it's up, unless they'd done something with the arrangement and made it more interesting, but it's a bit of a throwaway, really. And it's pretty rare that rarely I say that about Lennon, but that, I think it's true in this case. It's done in a kind of reggae fashion again. It's mildly interesting, but I don't really go back to it very often. Then we've got the great couplet of songs, love songs to each other, recorded in demo form. Let Me Count the Ways from Yoko, accompanying herself on the piano, home demo, and then growled along with me, John accompanying himself on the piano and rhythm box, recorded at home. And these are very touching songs to each other, inspired by the poems of Robert and Liz Browning, who are 19th century poets. And later on we'd get a sort of orchestrated version of this demo, Growled Along With Me, with George Martin doing the orchestration, came out on the anthology. And I liked it, although when I met Yoko in 98, she said George Martin's arrangement was very fruity, which I don't think was a compliment. Or maybe she said too fruity, I can't remember. But anyway, Ringo later covered Growled Along With Me and had Paul McCartney accompany him on bass. So you had three Beatles on that track, effectively, and Jack Douglas produced it. And he did a string arrangement which had a bit reminiscent of Here Comes the Sun. So Ringo said in some ways it's all four of us. And it was a decent version, and I'm glad he did it. You're the One closes the album, another love song to John, written by Yoko after he died, and quite decent, but nothing special. But it does have more of an 80s up-to-date groove than maybe the Lennon tracks, although they weren't the Lennon tracks, as I keep repeating, were not fleshed out properly as they would have been had John lived, if it had been finished. And in the Andy Peoples interview, he said, "We'll just go in after Christmas and finish it off." So it probably come out in the spring of '81, if I'm guessing, and then he would have, if he was true to his word, he would have gone on tour with the band in perhaps the summer of '81. So all that is unfortunately just what if material, or what might have been. Sad to contemplate that, but interesting as well in a way. So I've come up with an alternative Milk and Honey using tracks which were used on Season of Glass by Yoko. But so on this album, all of the tracks here from Yoko were written within John's lifetime. So that's why I think it's a more valid Milk and Honey in a way. But anyway, I've opened it up with Walking on Thin Ice, the Yoko track which they were working on the night John died, and I think that would make a great opener for the album. And John was obsessed by it and said, "I think you've got your first number one." So it may have also been a single. Had John lived, they probably would have released this as a single anyway, although it did come out after John died and was a top 30 hit, I believe, in the UK. I'm not sure what it did in the US. So I'm going to follow Walking on Thin Ice with I Don't Want to Face It. I think it's a strong number 2 track. Dogtown from Season of Glass, the Yoko track, originally written in 1974 and recorded for the album A Story, but I think she does a better version on the Season of Glass, and I think using the Double Fantasy Band, and that's the version that's on here on this hypothetical album. Nobody Told Me from John follows next. I doubt he would have ended up giving it to Ringo, though who knows. So I put it on there. Nobody Sees Me Like You Do is a track that John remarked he loved the chords of, so I put that on from Yoko. Serve Yourself, which came out on Anthology. It's a kind of irreverent sort of Mickey take of Bob Dylan's Gotta Serve Somebody, or taking the piss out of religion in general, if we're honest. And maybe he wouldn't have released it, maybe he thought it was too controversial or something, but I think it's hilarious. And after John died, I had picked up a bootleg which had this track on it, and I absolutely loved it. Very, very amusing lyrics, although he does use the F-bomb on more than one occasion. But I put that on to close side one. Side two I'm going to open with I'm Stepping Out. Then Will You Touch Me from Yoko, which was on the Season of Glass, but which she'd written back in 71. Borrowed Time is next from Lennon. Silver Horse from Season of Glass, which was definitely written around the Double Fantasy sessions. I don't think it was recorded properly, but it's a lovely song with a superb guitar solo from Earl Slick. So that's next. Roll Along With Me from John is the second to last track, and then I finished it with Yoko's Let Me Count the Way. So this was my alternative Milk and Honey. I hope you liked it. You may not agree. And I just want to say a little bit about the other posthumous releases we had in the 80s. So we had this album from Yoko, which was a tribute to Yoko with people doing her songs, including John Lennon, Everybody Has a Woman Who Loves Him, which was basically the Double Fantasy track with Yoko's vocals mixed out. So it sounded like a solo Lennon track, so it was a bit of a cheat. But anyway, that was quite interesting. And then in 1986, we had the Live in New York City, which we talked about earlier. It wasn't very well produced, unfortunately, but that'll be rectified later this year, as we know. Then we had Men Love Avenue, which was a slightly pointless album from 1986. So side one is less pointless because we hadn't heard some of the tracks, like Rock and Roll People and Here We Go Again, a Lennon Spector track. Angel Baby, a rock and roll album outtake, and as was Since My Baby Left Me and To Know Her Is To Love Her. But they're not very good outtakes, with the exception of Angel Baby. And then side two of that album is just outtakes from Walls and Bridges, rather randomly selected for the side two of that album. So it's not an album I go back to. I play side one occasionally, but it's not on Spotify, I've noticed. So that was Milk and Honey. I'll just show you the back cover. That's Central Park scene overlooking the lake with Dakota in the background. And then we've got the famous bed scene from John and Yoko, recorded a couple months before he died. And a little blurb about Robert and Liz Browning there. And yeah, it's a decent enough album, although it's obviously very frustrating and sad in some ways because it's unfinished. And we never know what John would have come up with had he lived, but it would have been, a lot of it would have been pretty sensational in my opinion. So that was Milk and Honey. Thank you for watching. See you next time.